How much would it cost to construct a modern-day Great Pyramid? 30,000 laborers worked for over 60 years to build the Giza Pyramid complex. Vacation days weren't a thing, and these laborers worked day and night from roughly 2550 to 2490 BC to construct the marvel. Things are a lot different today. We have access to modern technology, modern materials, and cost-cutting methods. Still, if you were to construct a Great Pyramid in the 21st century, you're looking at shelling out around $300 million, and that's the lower limit. In a nutshell, modern-day Egypt has access to an architectural marvel that otherwise cannot be replicated elsewhere. But that actually includes elsewhere in Egypt too. During the construction of the Great Pyramids, and for several centuries afterward, Egypt was one of the world's richest nations. During the 18th dynasty, Egypt was the richest country in the world. But how does Egypt's economy fare in the modern world? Let's be honest, not that great. Home to 112 million, estimates put 60% of the population below the poverty line. How can that be? While poverty existed in ancient Egypt too, things were never this dire. After all, Egypt thrived during the Bronze Age because of its innovativeness and potential to industrialize. Ancient Poland, Germany, and Italy would have been some of its contemporaries during the Bronze Age, but in the present day, they couldn't be any more different. Egypt continues to face economic challenges and is considered a poor nation, while countries that had less power than they did at one time continue to thrive. What happened to the industrialization and the potential Egypt once had? Why can't the country that created the Great Pyramids even dream of accomplishing such a feat today? The global economy is a lot more diverse than it once was. Countries fighting for the top spot all have an equal opportunity to get there. The United States, for example, is under constant threat of being dethroned as the largest economy by China, Japan, and Germany. And you get the idea. It's a struggle and everyone has a leg in the race. Even modern-day Egypt, if we're being honest. The country is currently in 31st place on the list of largest economies. However, modern-day Egypt is still a few trillions of dollars short of becoming the biggest economy in the world. The chances of Egypt reclaiming the top spot are slim to none. Likewise, the chances of other economies such as Colombia, Romania, and Chile, all outside the top 10 ranking, of reaching the number one spot are nominal. But Egypt's story is a lot different than theirs. These countries, or several others outside of the top 10 economies of the world, never had a fighting chance of becoming number one. Egypt, on the other hand, did, and at one point in history, it was number one. So to start on why modern-day Egypt is so poor, we have to turn back time and talk about ancient Egypt. However, to keep things interesting, let's compare ancient Egypt with ancient Greece and ancient China, and then see how all three booming economies in the historic era fare in the modern world. We're obviously starting with ancient Egypt, that is, the pre-dynastic period of 3100 BC to the Roman period starting in 395 CE. What was the base of Egypt's economy back then? Simply, agriculture and trade. The Nile, the longest river in the world, has 22% of its course running through Egypt. Farmers would make use of this seasonal flooding to produce a variety of crops and grains. Ancient Egyptians were the first in the world to make use of modern-day agricultural practices. They also developed modern irrigation systems. Ancient Egypt produced a massive output of the world's industrial crops such as flax and papyrus, plus a large share of the world's grains such as wheat and barley. Before the Persian invasion in 525 BCE, Egyptians traded with numerous states using the barter system. Monetary trade wasn't introduced until much later. Goods were valued at debens, but there was never a coin for deben. It was a simplified way of ascribing value to something. For example, papyrus could have the same value for a pair of sandals. Because of their advancements in agriculture and the ease of access to trade with other countries in Africa, Egypt was able to flourish as a thriving economy. Of course, we have to admit that a major share of its wealth also came from invasion and the spoils of war. Still, the biggest thing to consider here is that ancient Egypt was a flourishing economy that could self-sustain. Comparatively, the ancient Greeks boosted their economy more so through invasion. Ancient Greece, especially under Alexander the Great, conquered a vast empire stretching from Greece to northwest India. Key regions included parts of modern Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Alexander's campaigns and the subsequent Hellenistic kingdoms, like the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires, influenced additional territories, including parts of Libya and Sudan. These conquests spread Greek culture widely, known as Hellenization, impacting the political and cultural landscapes of these regions significantly. This isn't to say that the ancient Greeks didn't have other ways to make money at home. The economy was diverse and included agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship. Frankly, all things that ancient Egyptians had to offer too. In agriculture, the Greeks relied primarily on olive oil and wine production. Trade was mainly done via the open waters. The Greeks thrived on maritime trade, which connected them to regions in Asia and Africa. Yes, including Egypt. On that note, however, Egypt had the advantage since it could also access several trade routes by land just as easily too. Lastly, ancient China. And if you haven't noticed a trend just yet, it's that thriving economies from historic times all followed the same money-making patterns. Ancient China was notably prosperous with a diverse economy. Again, they relied on agriculture and trade mainly to drive their economy. The Silk Road connected China with distant markets, enabling the export of silk, paper, tea, and porcelain. This not only brought wealth, but also facilitated cultural and technological exchanges. Chinese merchants also traded extensively by sea, linking with regions across the Indian Ocean. Now that we've talked about the ancient civilizations and how they prospered and sustained themselves, let's take a look at how these economies fare in the present day. Before that, however, did you know that the world has only seen 6 trillionaires in all of history? 6 might seem like a low number, but a trillion is not. For context, if you started counting right now, it would take you 32,000 years to reach a trillion. Yet, there were 6 people in history who made several trillion, and one of them was from Egypt, Amenhotep III, an ancient pharaoh with an estimated wealth of between $4 to $6 trillion by today's standards. All this to suggest that the wealth possessed by ancient Egypt is beyond comparison. How much of that have they retained today? This time, let's start with modern-day Greece and China, and then circle back to modern-day Egypt. In 2023, Greece was recognized as the Country of the Year by The Economist for its economic performance among first-world economies. Greece's GDP is projected to grow by 2.9% in 2024, surpassing the average growth rates of the Eurozone. The country has also seen improvements in its unemployment rate, which is expected to drop to 10.6% in 2024 from 11.2% in 2023. Investment is a key driver of Greece's economic growth, with private investments anticipated to rise by 15.1% in 2024. The country's focus on structural reforms and prudent fiscal policies is expected to further enhance its economic stability and credit ratings. That being said, China is in a different ballpark entirely, currently inching closer to becoming the largest economy in the world. Today, it sits second only to the United States. In 2024, the BBC reported that the Chinese economy has boomed despite an initial setback in 2023. The country's GDP expanded by 5.3% in the first few months of 2024, an ambitious goal set by Beijing in January, suggesting that if anyone could reach a 5% increase, it would be them. Fair play to China, because they achieved what they set out for. The modern-day Chinese economy relies on several factors. While still a huge chunk can be ascribed to agriculture, it now more focuses on manufacturing and exports. China is a mass producer of several goods. Plus, with its expansive workforce, China is a key player in the goods, trades, and services industry. That's still not all. China also has a huge market share in the technology and innovation sector. But what about Egypt? Admittedly, Egypt has the second largest economy in Africa, even if it lags behind overall in global rankings. While Greece and China have managed to diversify their economies and bring in new sectors, Egypt has only managed to introduce one: tourism. Agriculture still makes up a huge chunk of the country's economy, about 11%, but tourism makes up just the same, if not more, with a range between 10 to 15%. Remittances from Egyptians working abroad contribute significantly to the country's foreign reserves. The Suez Canal is a crucial waterway, generating revenue from tolls charged to passing ships. Egypt's substantial natural gas and petroleum reserves contribute to export earnings and government revenue. The manufacturing sector, including textiles and electronics, benefits from strategic location and relatively low labor costs. Agriculture, although declining, remains important, particularly for rural livelihoods. Water management projects are crucial, given the economy's reliance on the Nile River. Do you see a difference? It's hard to miss. The economy of modern-day Egypt cannot compare to the economies of Greece and China, not by a mile. While the playing field was somewhat leveled in ancient times, it's not today. If anything, one of the mainstays in Egypt's economy that's kept it from the brink of collapse is tourism. In other words, the remains of its great civilization and the income generated from it in the 21st century is still what keeps Egypt afloat. But when did it get this bad? Or better yet, how? Obviously, several factors come into play when we talk about the whys and hows. Still, if you wanted to narrow it down to two key factors, it'd come to corruption and conflict. Starting with corruption, tourists visiting the Great Pyramids have warned other travelers, sometimes swearing off ever returning to the magnificent marvel, all because of the rampant corruption that takes place in Egypt. To put this into context, Reddit users named Cairo as the worst travel destination in the world. However, corruption runs much deeper than a few scams against unsuspecting tourists. Reportedly, nearly every sector in Egypt. In 2022, the Corruption Perspective Index named Egypt and Bangladesh as two of the most corrupt countries in the world, with active organ trafficking markets that often go unchecked by local governments. Today, Egypt sits at 108 against a total of 140 countries on perceived corruption. One of the biggest consequences of corruption is the misallocation of funds and resources. Namely, resources that would have otherwise gone toward public projects, infrastructure, and development end up in the pockets of corrupt officials. Most notably, the Mendez scandal highlighted how first world nations were apprehensive about conducting foreign relations with Egypt. The case involves bribes by the Egyptian government to U.S. Senator Bob Mendez, who had control over the U.S.'s foreign policy as the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Mendez was offered gold bars and envelopes of cash in exchange for securing arms deals with Cairo and relocating U.S. aid and capital toward Egypt. Corruption creates risks that scare off investors, which hurts economic growth, job opportunities, and technological progress. When bribery and favoritism give unfair advantages to certain businesses, it blocks fair competition and innovation. People struggle with government red tape, which makes them lose faith in authorities. It also damages trust in institutions meant to uphold laws and property rights, making it hard for businesses to operate fairly. Overall, corruption holds back both the economy and people's trust in the system. Moving on to conflict in the Middle East that undermined whatever the ancient Egyptians had built. The conflict, by the way, is ongoing to this day, and reports suggest that Egypt's economy will continue to suffer as the years go by with no end in sight. Egypt's tourism sector, a vital contributor to its economy, has faced setbacks due to conflicts and security issues in the region. For example, following the Arab Spring uprisings in 2011 and subsequent unrest, Egypt experienced a significant decline in tourist arrivals. Before the Arab Spring in 2010, Egypt attracted approximately 14.7 million tourists. But by 2016, this number had plummeted to about 5.4 million, as reported by the World Bank. The disruption of trade routes, coupled with security concerns and geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, can disrupt shipping activities through the Suez Canal. Any decrease in transit revenues from the canal could adversely affect Egypt's economy, given its importance as a significant source of foreign exchange earnings. For instance, in 2021, the Suez Canal Authority reported revenues exceeding $5.8 billion. Moreover, regional conflicts and geopolitical tensions can impact Egypt's trade and investment climate. The uncertainty and instability in neighboring countries may dissuade foreign investors and disrupt trade flows, thereby affecting Egypt's imports and exports. Additionally, heightened security concerns may result in increased insurance costs for businesses operating in the region, further influencing investment decisions. Now, does corruption and conflict only exist in Egypt? We know that's not true. However, these two factors, amongst several others, have forced Egypt into a decline. From once being considered a pioneer and at the forefront of the world's economy, Egypt doesn't stand a chance in the modern world. What's probably more disheartening is the fact that other economies, Egypt's contemporaries, managed to soar, while Egypt stayed stagnant for a long time, and eventually headed toward a decline. Could Egypt retain its former glory? We'll leave that one up to you. Thanks for watching. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and while you're here, check out some of our other videos.